when we overfed mice in order to produce obesity, and then we pushed them over the edge into a mouse model of type 2 diabetes, and we looked at their NAD metabolome in their liver, and the liver is kind of a really central hub of metabolic regulation in the body. We found that NADPH, which is responsible for controlling reactive oxygen species and making testosterone and making estrogen and a whole lot of other really important things, NADPH was under attack.
What's up, my friend? I'm health expert Ted Rice, and today I have a very special treat for you. I have Dr. Charles Brenner, who is coming on the show. Now, Charles is a leading figure in metabolism research who discovered the vitamin activity of something called nicotinamide riboside. And the nicotinamide riboside kinase pathway to NAD. I know that's a lot of word salad right there and a sciencey sounding stuff, but I initially spoke with Charles over Twitter. We had a conversation because Charles felt like people were talking about resveratrol, about NAD, about nicotinamide riboside, and making unsubstantiated claims about these supplements and also about longevity in general. So if you're interested in living longer, if you want to know what actually has been proven to work or how long a human being can live, some people out there are saying, oh, I want to live until 180 years old. What does the science show about how long a human can live? And how do we keep our health and our function as we live to these older ages? That's what we're going to get into today. Now, I'll tell you, NAD has become a hot topic in healthy aging. You may not have heard of it before, but you're going to learn about it today. And Charles is here to help you understand NAD and to help shield you from the magical and evidence-free claims. So we're going to talk about metabolism, about supplements, and that type of thing. And again, you're going to learn a lot about longevity and what the science has shown that we can actually put into our lives and do. And before I get to that, I want to say, if you enjoy this episode, the biggest compliment you can pay me is to share this episode. I fight hard to get people like Charles, like some of the other people that come on the show, Keith Barr, Kevin Boss, or some recent ones. I fight hard to get people who come on to separate the fact from the fiction so that you can get better results, so that you can know the truth about what is really going to help you. And if you appreciate what I do, please share this episode. Show me some appreciation for what I do by sharing this episode on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, with your friends, wherever it is that you find yourself online. All right, let's get to the interview with Charles Brenner. All right. Well, Dr. Charles Brenner, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a build-up, and we're finally making it happen in spite of both our busy schedules. So thank you so much for being here today.
So glad to be here.
And just to provide a little bit of context, I already did a bit of an intro for you, but can you briefly describe yourself and what it is that you do?
Well, I'm a metabolism scientist. I'm trained as a biochemist and as a geneticist. And I work on a molecule called NAD, which stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. And there's really 4 NAD compounds. And these are the central catalysts of metabolism. And we're interested in how NAD coenzymes are made, how they're degraded, how they work in all of our cells, how they maintain health and viability and resiliency in our tissues, and how to maintain NAD through times of metabolic stress as well as aging.
Excellent. I've heard about NAD for a long time, or at least in the past, 5 years, and I've seen advertisements for it on Facebook, as I'm sure many of the listeners right now have. and many of your followers on Twitter have. And today, I want to bring you on because you are this leading researcher. And I want to make clear, there's a lot of people out there who, as we talked about before we hopped on and started recording, make claims about research, but you are the guy doing the research specifically on NAD and some of the metabolism research that you've done. So for those of you listening, that's what Charles, he's not interpreting someone else's research, although he may do that, but he's the guy who has done a lot of the research and sees the flaws and misrepresentations of the research in the popular media. So if you listen to Joe Rogan's podcast, Ben Greenfield's podcast, Dave Asprey's podcast, and other great podcasts, but sometimes people make claims about supplements, about longevity, about what works and what doesn't. And so I wanted you to come on and clear things up today. Could we start with this? What are the things, the biggest myths that you see out there, not just regarding NAD, but just longevity in general?
Well, the first thing that I'll say is that I don't believe in Santa Claus. And,
okay.
So I was raised Jewish, so I wasn't inclined to believe in Santa Claus. Sometimes when you come from the outside, you can kind of figure out what's going on in a system. But sort of the myth is that, all good children will get presents, and it's actually not true. So there are good children that don't get presents, and there are bad children that get presents, and the size of the presents doesn't actually correlate with the goodness of the kid. It's more related to family behavior and wealth and other complicated things, right? So, but the myth of Santa Claus is very appealing, and the myth of eternal life is very appealing, and it's been with us as long as people have been born and people have been dying. But there are some fundamental things that we understand about the universe, and the same kind of critical thinking that allows one to figure out whether Santa Claus is a myth or a reality can allow us to figure out whether Ponce de Leon or anybody else has found a fountain of youth. And fundamentally, we learn that there are no perpetual motion machines, that there is a tendency towards disorder, and these things come out of physics, right? The first and second laws of thermodynamics, and biology is really complicated, but biology can't violate the rules of chemistry and physics. And we understand that living organisms have a lifespan. We don't always know what the maximum lifespan is, but we do understand that living things have a maximum amount of time in which fertility is maintained, a maximum amount of time in which organismal viability is maintained. And for human beings, it seems to be around 120 years. And so I think it's an absolutely terrific goal for more of us to live healthier, more resilient lives, to approach our maximal lifespans, which are going to be affected by our genes and our environment. But the idea that aging is optional, or that we understand aging enough to reverse it, are truly not supported by evidence. And NAD has been described as a critical regulator of longevity because of observations that NAD, some of the NAD metabolites, decline as a function of age in certain tissues. But I can tell you that NAD is truly under attack in many conditions of metabolic stress. Like, for example, sun damage. When DNA is damaged, right, by the sun or by oxidative stress, these sorts of things, there's DNA repair processes that actually churn and consume NAD, the central regulator of metabolism. And there's probably 8 different conditions I could tell you of conditions of metabolic stress in which NAD is under attack. So we know that by restoring NAD, that we can restore cellular resiliency and tissue resiliency, and that can support animal health. And we think that in the fullness of time that we'll be able to demonstrate that NAD boosting supplements like nicotinamide riboside, which came out of my laboratory, will help us maintain health and resiliency through aging. But no, we don't think that we're going to live forever with NAD boosting, and people that are suggesting that don't really have the evidence to support that. Has nicotinamide riboside been shown to extend lifespan in animal systems? Yes, moderately, but not beyond the normal, lifespan of mice. And laboratory mice are in particular environments, that are challenging for a number of reasons, like they basically overeat in their cages because they don't have to go out and scurry for food. And under those kinds of conditions, nicotinamide riboside, can support their healthy lifespan. And we think that there will be those types of values added to the human existence, but I don't go around telling people that they're going to live to 180 or longer, and I don't tell people that there are simple mechanisms by which NR works, because it's actually very complicated and pleiotropic, and but anyway, that's an intro to NAD, the central regulator of metabolism, and that's a little background on where I'm coming from and how we don't like to overpromise things that violate laws of nature.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's what we do on this show. I say we focus on the truth. Of course, that truth is ever evolving, ever changing, and ever nuanced as more research comes out, as we understand all the factors that interplay to create health or help us live a long time. So let's do this. Let's talk a little bit about nutrition, and then about when does NAD, who should be taking it, and what will the benefit be? So we know that, and I'm just going to rattle off what I know based on the people I've had on the show, on the research that I've read. So we know that having a high VO2 max is correlated with a longer health span, longer lifespan, however you want to characterize it. We know that muscle strength is also correlated. I had Keith Barr, he was talking about research where if you're at midlife and if you're at the strongest third of the group of midlifers, your chances to living to 100 is much higher. We also know that maintaining, some people like to call it low risk body fat percentage, however you like to characterize it, but maintaining a certain range of body fat where it's going to minimize your chances of developing diabetes, developing certain cancers, and that's through caloric, being on top of your calories, regardless of where those calories are coming from. Then we have Dr. Bruce Ames talks about triage theory, where let's say if you maintain a certain, and of course, I'm sure you know about this, but just for the benefit of the people listening who don't, triage theory is this idea that if you don't get enough micronutrients from the food that you eat, so you could be super lean, but have not the best diet in terms of the vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients that you're getting, and you can be suboptimal in micronutrients, and that could potentially, not 100% sure there, but more and more evidence is kind of gathering to show that suboptimal micronutrient status may accelerate certain diseases of aging. And so we have those things. Then what else is there that we could do? And where does NAD fit in with that? Can I be someone who just doesn't do any of that other stuff, take NAD? I want people to understand the context there.
Right. So let's start with what I'm going to call mom and Ted's advice, because mom's advice is similar to the kind of things that you're talking about. Good common sense, right? Be active, mentally active, physically active, maintain muscle mass. Turns out that if you divide people into quartiles of walking speed, you can also predict their future years of life and their future years of disease-free life. So muscle mass is important because, skeletal muscle is one of the biggest glucose disposers, right? So high blood glucose and pre-diabetic conditions that can drive us into fatty liver can disable almost every organ system in the body. And so maintaining muscle mass in order to avoid glucose excursions is a really good thing. It also helps you support your chassis and stay active and not, die if you fall. And so muscle's a good thing. Physical activity is a good thing. Probably not eating too late in the evening is a good thing. I don't think that I'm personally not an intermittent faster. I know people who are. You and I were talking before we started the interview about your experience in Southeast Asia, seeing people that are fit in their 70s and 80s and beyond that don't have any specific podcast approved way of eating, but they eat in moderation. They don't snack on highly processed foods at 11 p.m. They probably don't use elevators all the time. They probably don't spend a whole lot of time in parking lots looking for the very nearest space. And there's something about, I think, being connected to nature and using your legs to get yourself from point A to point B and using your brain to solve problems that I think is associated with fitness and good health. So those kinds of common sense practices that get us back to our animal nature, I think, are good for us. One of the reasons why there is an obesity epidemic is that over 500 million years of animal evolution, we've evolved to resist famine, right? We've evolved to be able to survive periods in which food is uncertain, right? Which means that our bodies are really good at identifying tasty, nutrient-dense food, right? We have biochemical pathways that will turn carbohydrate into fat, and we can store that fat for in case there's a famine, right? So in case the hunt is not successful, I have enough body fat on me to survive the next week. Or if this is a very difficult winter, I may have enough body fat to get through this winter. And that's if I were to look outside here in Iowa City in mid-November of 2019, I would see the squirrels at pretty much their fattest point of the year. They're fattening up on nuts so that they can survive when there's snow cover. They're going to maintain a body fat. And we actually have a cycle of our calendar in the Northern Hemisphere that is similar to that, where we're going to overeat on Thanksgiving and we're going to overeat between Christmas and New Year's, and we're really fat. But the problem is that we don't So that's why they sell you the gym memberships on, January 2, right? Because we get in our cars and we use our elevators and we don't have energy expenditure, right? So the reason why mice in the wild don't become overweight, whereas mice in cages do become overweight, is that a mouse in the wild spends exactly as many calories over the course of 24 hours to acquire the calories that it needs to run its body for the next 24 hours. Whereas in the cage, we do something called ad libitum feeding, which means they eat as much as they want because we have a food hopper in there and they effectively overeat. So human beings are effectively overeating because we've dissociated going to expend energy to get our food from eating food, right? And just with a simple plastic charge card, we can acquire thousands of calories for very few dollars and even pay for it, next month or much later. So we have the ability to acquire calories without burning calories, and that's essentially what makes us fat. So there's this whole lifestyle piece that we want to burn calories and maintain muscle mass and maintain mental activity in order to maintain a healthy, resilient lifestyle. Now, where does NAD come in this? Well, the thing is about life is that blank happens, right? Stuff happens. And just the fact that we are breathing oxygen and we need the sun to help us make vitamin D, and we have occasion to change time zones, and we occasionally listen to, loud music, just to name a few things. We're in an environment in which aspects of our NAD are under attack. So here's a funny thing that I do when I'm in a group of people, and I say, how many people would like to, show of hands, how many people would like to hop on a jet to Ibiza, to sit out in the sun, staying up late, listening to loud music, drinking wine, and eating great food, right? And everyone raises their hand. And changing time zones, irregular hours, sun exposure, alcohol metabolism, overnutrition, which is eating too much, loud noise, all of those things actually attack the NAD system in one or more tissues. So the central regulators, there's really 4 NAD coenzymes of metabolism, are sort of exposed to the elements of the conditions in which we live, in which what I call metabolic stresses attack our ability to conduct metabolism and maintain our resiliency. So I think that there is a role for NAD boosting supplements in order to maintain resiliency and healthy aging. Now, what exactly is NAD and how do you maintain it? How do you boost it? NAD really, Ted, is in food, okay? And let's back up and let's talk about what are macronutrients and what are micronutrients, because you referred to Dr. Bruce Ames and micronutrients. So we should talk about what are macronutrients and what are micronutrients. We also talked about calories. So macronutrients are basically protein, fat, and carbohydrate, right? They're things that have calories. They're the stuff in food that is catabolized, that is broken down in order to produce biological energy in form of ATP, in order to be converted into heat that maintains our body temperature, and then also in order to be partially broken down into intermediate metabolites that makes everything else in our body. On Twitter, I've pointed out multiple times that metabolism is not just everything you eat into ATP. That's maybe 15% of metabolism. Metabolism is everything you eat into literally everything that you are. Unless you have bionic parts or a Teflon hip or something like that, everything in your body was manufactured from everything that you ate. All the testosterone and estrogen that people make, all of the signaling lipids that they make, all of the DNA that their cells replicate and repair, all of the RNA and all of the cells that is being made and turnover all the time, all of that is made from the food that we eat, from protein, fat, and carbohydrate. Those are macronutrients. And the ability to convert the macronutrients into the whole body depends upon catalysts, right? And the catalysts are enzymes and coenzymes. And four of the most important coenzymes are NAD coenzymes. They're called NAD+, NADH, NADP+, and NADPH, for those of you who are keeping score. In humans, the four NAD coenzymes are the central regulators of metabolism, the central catalyst of metabolism that allows us to convert everything that we eat into everything that we are. But guess what? That's true in everything that we eat also. So that's true in chickens, that's true in apples, that's true in avocados, that's true in fungi, in mushrooms, that's true in animals, vegetables, and fungi, right? So they're all living things. They all have intermediary metabolism, and NAD coenzymes are just as fundamental to the metabolism of all of the things that we eat as they are to us, which means that when we're eating whole foods, that's with a small w and a small f, we're getting not only macronutrients, but we're getting micronutrients. We're getting their NAD coenzymes. Now, the thing is that NAD has what are called 2 phosphate groups on it. NADP has 3 phosphate groups on it. Phosphate groups are great, but phosphate groups have to come off before molecules can get into a cell. And NAD works inside of cells. So when we eat food, we're breaking down the protein, fat, and carbohydrate into digestible bits. Like protein gets broken down into peptides and amino acids in order to rebuild proteins inside of our cells. And NAD coenzymes also get broken down. When NAD coenzymes get broken down by digestion, they're broken down into what are called vitamins. And 2 of those 3 vitamins, which are called nicotinic acid and nicotinamide, were discovered in 1938 by a scientist named Conrad Elvehjem up the road in Madison, Wisconsin, at University of Wisconsin. And the other NAD precursor vitamin, nicotinamide riboside, was essentially discovered as an NAD precursor vitamin for organisms from yeast to humans by my group in 2004. So essentially, when you eat whole foods, whether it's chicken or beef or pork or seafood or fish or vegetables or fungi, you're getting protein, fat, and carbohydrate. You're getting NAD. All of those things are being broken down, and they're being made available to your cells in order to give you the calories that you need in order to function and in order for you to be able to rebuild your NAD supply. Now, as we discussed, many conditions of metabolic stress, including sun damage, reactive oxygen, species damage, changing time zones, noise, sufficient to produce hearing loss, et cetera, plus many disease processes like heart failure and neurodegeneration. Many conditions of metabolic stress attack NAD, and essentially that's the use case for an NAD precursor supplement, of which there, as I said, there are now three. Nicotinamide and nicotinic acid are the commonly known ones, and NR, nicotinamide riboside, is the more recently discovered one.
Okay. So thanks for that intro into, well, this area of metabolism that, I think a lot of us have heard about, but you dove into it quite a bit more, and specifically talking about NAD. So let's talk about this, because this is one of the questions that several people had asked when I said I was interviewing you and asked people if they had any questions. One of them was, who should be taking NAD supplements? You kind of just said, if you're living a suboptimal lifestyle, which every single person in the modern world arguably is, if you're not living in, in the jungles of Costa Rica or on the island of Sardinia or one of the blue zones, for example. So we're all living this suboptimal lifestyle. We're all subjecting ourselves to more oxidative stress than we should. Like you mentioned, the long flight to Ibiza to listen to loud music and drink wine and indulge in over nutrition, as you said, eating too many calories, in other words. So you're saying that anybody with kind of living a suboptimal lifestyle, suboptimal defined as, not in perfect congruence with nature, right? Not to go into all the infectious diseases that we used to have to deal with and no longer do, but just kind of the more chronic stuff that we deal with. So that's who can benefit from it, is what I hear you say. What is the specific benefit other than the obvious, where, all these things that deplete our NAD, yeah, we can eat it back with meat, veggies, fungi, but having a supplement can help. What exactly does it do? What does replenishing our NAD coenzymes in the cells do for us as a supplement?
Okay, so there's two or three questions in there. One of the questions in there.
I tend to do that, Charles. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. But let's try to unpack them. So one of the questions in there is, okay, Brenner, if you just told us that NAD is in food, is in whole unprocessed food, and that NAD is broken down into NR, nicotinamide, and nicotinic acid, which are the NAD precursor vitamins, why don't we just eat more food in order to, maintain our NAD? So it's true that NAD is in food, and NAD precursors are formed by food digestion, and our cells and tissues have the ability to convert those NAD precursors back to NAD coenzymes. And in, a perfect world, there's a cycle of life in which everything is kind of taken care of. But because overnutrition this is something that our laboratory discovered in 2016, we overfed mice, and when we overfed mice in order to produce obesity, and then we pushed them over the edge into a mouse model of type 2 diabetes, and we looked at their NAD metabolome in their liver, and the liver is kind of a really central hub of metabolic regulation in the body. We found that NADPH, which is responsible for controlling reactive oxygen species and making testosterone and making estrogen and a whole lot of other really important things, NADPH was under attack in the fat mouse's liver. And so just feeding that mouse more food, even though there's NAD precursors in food, is not going to address that, because in its over-nutritional state, the excess of calories is leading to an attack in the NAD system. So we think there is a place for NAD precursor supplements. We've actually kind of known this for 100 years because in the American South, 100 years ago, there were 1 million cases of pellagra, which was a nutritional deficiency that was initially misdiagnosed as an infectious disease. Joseph Goldberger went down to the American South with the first grant from the Public Health Service. This is the forerunner to the U.S. National Institutes of Health. And he discovered that people with pellagra basically had a nutritional deficiency because they were not eating fresh food. They were eating corn rations and lard, plus some alcohol. And they really weren't getting enough NAD precursors. At the time, NAD was not known. The chemical structure of the central catalysts of fermentation and metabolic processes were not known. The structure of NAD was not known, but Goldberger figured out that something in fresh food was required to prevent pellagra. And he could actually reverse and prevent pellagra with stuff like meat and eggs and dairy. And then, as I said, in 1938, LVM figured out that nicotinic acid and nicotinamide were pure vitamins that are pellagra preventative. And then by that time, the structure of NAD was being deduced, and you could see that nicotinamide is literally a piece of nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. That's the relationship between a vitamin and a coenzyme. So vitamins don't have phosphates, and so they can go into cells, and then cells convert them into coenzymes, and then everything is happy and working. Now, the second part of your question was who benefits. So obviously, somebody in what's called a frank nutritional deficiency, like pellagra, massively benefits. Such people,
which is for people's just to be clear, pellagra is a niacin deficiency, correct?
Pellagra is essentially a deficiency of NAD precursor vitamins. This is what happens at the organism level, at the whole person level, when the cells and tissues are becoming deficient in NAD coenzymes. The people present with diarrhea, dermatitis, dementia, and this ultimately can lead to death. These are the 3 or 4 Ds of pellagra, to use the mnemonic that the 3 Ds of pellagra are diarrhea, dermatitis, and dementia, but ultimately could lead to death. So pellagra is the worst type of NAD deficiency. But when the United States and other, health services, World Health Organization and other nutritional consulting organizations decided that stuff like flour should be niacin enriched. And niacin is kind of a collective term for nicotinamide and nicotinic acid. These are the conventional forms of vitamin B3, the conventional NAD precursor vitamins. When they decided that if they enrich flour with niacin, that people won't present with pellagra, they won't come down with pellagra, even if they don't have varied diets that are rich in unprocessed foods. They basically said that you need about 15 milligrams a day of either nicotinamide or nicotinic acid in order to prevent pellagra. But they didn't decide that 15 milligrams of what's called niacin equivalent is the amount to optimize health.
Great distinction. Okay. Yeah.
And I can tell you that there are a lot of organizations, and you can, use your imagination of what kind of organizations, whether they might be pro sports teams or hardworking professionals or teams of executives that have to be functional at 8 or 9 a.m. after they change up a whole bunch of time zones, in which people need to optimize their health and fitness under conditions of ongoing metabolic stress. And so pro sports teams are full of guys and gals in their 20s, right? And, busy professionals can be in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And people that work outdoors that are exposed to sun and loud noises and reactive oxygen species can be any age. And people that have occasion to overeat or drink, or people that are at risk of neurodegenerative conditions or heart failure. Now you're talking about large swaths of the population. In fact, most of us probably in the developed world that potentially have a use case for an NAD precursor vitamin, of which there are three: nicotinamide, nicotinic acid, and nicotinamide riboside. There's also differences. There's important differences between these three NAD precursor vitamins, because nicotinic acid, niacin, is used by a number of people that are trying to control their cholesterol. So high dose nicotinic acid, I'm talking 2 to 5 grams per day, helps quite a lot of people lower their LDL cholesterol, that's the so-called bad cholesterol, while raising their HDL cholesterol. The reason why more people don't use it is that once you get above, let's say, 250 milligrams of nicotinic acid, most people will experience a flush response where, right. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but your face and your extremities get hot and itchy and uncomfortable. So while there are people that swear by high dose niacin, it's pretty uncomfortable. Also, not the reason that there are 3 different ways that cells can make, actually 4 different ways that cells can make NAD, is because there's 4 different gene pathways. That there's a gene and enzyme pathway to convert tryptophan, the amino acid tryptophan, to NAD coenzymes, but that gene pathway is not on in a whole lot of different cells and tissues. Neither is the nicotinic acid pathway. So neurons, which I would argue that, neurons in our brain and our peripheral nervous system are pretty important to our health span and our lifespan. Neurons don't have the ability to convert tryptophan and nicotinic acid into NAD, right? So even though nicotinic acid is a remarkable and useful compound, and I'm real happy that Conrad Elvehjem, discovered it in 1938 as an NAD precursor vitamin, there's not a growing number of people that are looking to take nicotinic acid supplements. Nicotinamide is another classic form of vitamin B3. It doesn't have what we call anti-dyslipidemic properties. That means it doesn't lower your LDL cholesterol and raise your HDL cholesterol like niacin does. And there's concern that at high dose nicotinamide that you may be inhibiting some of the enzyme pathways that you want to stimulate with NAD. Although there's an animal model that shows that higher doses of nicotinamide are useful against glaucoma in a mouse. So I'm not entirely sure that nicotinamide should be, totally rejected, but it's not something that has really gained a whole lot of traction in recent years because nicotinamide at high doses, we know, inhibits a class of enzymes called sirtuins. And, a lot of people are trying to do things that will increase their sirtuin activity. I'm personally not convinced that sirtuins are the main mediators of maintaining NAD, but that's probably in podcast 2 or something like that.
Right. Well, now, Charles,
I do want to do one more because I haven't hit NR. So disclosure, when Brenner lab discovered that NR is a NAD precursor vitamin in organisms from yeast to humans in 2004, I was at Dartmouth. We filed for patents. Those patents have been issued. They've been licensed by Chromadex, and they've been developed into a product called Niagen, or direct-to-consumer product called True Niagen. And so I have financial interest in nicotinamide riboside, so I want to make sure that that is disclosed. I'm now a 100% employee of the University of Iowa, but I'm a consultant and a stock owner, of Chromadex, which developed the NR technology from my time at Dartmouth. But the thing that is special about NR is that, number one, NR doesn't cause flushing. Number two, NR can be used by all cells and tissues, including neurons. Number three, NR doesn't inhibit sirtuins. But I think the most important thing is that in these diseases and conditions in which NAD is under attack, like strikingly in heart failure and neurodegeneration and other conditions in which a tissue is losing its NAD, the NR gene pathway, they're called nicotinamide riboside kinase 1 gene and nicotinamide riboside kinase 2 gene. These genes are upregulated. It's as though a damaged cell is looking for NR in order to restore its NAD and restore its resiliency to damage and these processes that undermine cellular and tissue health. And so we think that NR is very special in its ability to be used by damaged cells when the NAD system is under attack. And we know largely from mouse studies that when you have these mice with a failing heart, and when you have these mice that have chemotherapeutic neuropathy or diabetic neuropathy or noise-induced hearing loss or muscular dystrophy, et cetera, that oral nicotinamide riboside will prevent these diseases and conditions and maintain optimum health. We also know that NR is orally available in humans and that it raises human NAD, in a timely and dose-dependent fashion without producing adverse events. And we're very much engaged in testing NR in many diseases and conditions of metabolic stress in order to be able to put claims on NAD. Right now, when you put claims on NR, on Niagen, right now, when you buy Niagen or True Niagen, you look on the label and it says not intended to treat disease or condition. So what we've established, and in something that's been observed by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, we've established that nicotinamide riboside is generally regarded as safe. We have it designated as a new dietary ingredient, so it's on an FDA registry as a new dietary ingredient. The F in Food and Drug Administration refers to food, so NR is basically a food and nutritional supplement. And then what we're doing in the laboratory and in the clinic is we're testing NR for its potential efficacy in conditions of metabolic stress that could include anything from fatty liver disease to mild cognitive impairment.
And so what I hear you saying is you've done a lot of studies on this. You've looked into, okay, what makes sense here? What's the best thing to take to replace NAD in the body when the body's under, excessive metabolic stress, oxidative stress, and you, based on the research that you've done, you decided, or the evidence showed rather, that nicotinamide riboside was the thing because it can be used from all the reasons that you just mentioned. I can't even remember all of them. But and then you turned it into a supplement. I just want to say there's nothing wrong. I mean, I sell coaching and I believe in it because I get results for people. So I just want to say that I appreciate you. I think it's important to say, when you're financially, you have a vested financial interest in promoting a product, but at the same time, it just, there's some people who are promoting things that don't work at all. There's a number of supplements like that out there, Garcinia cambogia, or, I could list a dozen of them. But what you're saying is you've done a lot of painstaking research in figuring these things out. You believe there's strong evidence to show that, replenishing NAD with a supplement, especially because even though we can get it from food, the overnutrition problem in the United States, 70% of the population overweight or obese. So popping a supplement and getting the NAD replenished, especially by the nicotinamide riboside, is the way to go. So yeah, give it a try, right? So let's get a little practical is what I wanted to do. I think you've done a great job of providing context and really establishing, some strong foundational principles for why, we should consider taking this supplement. But let's go practical here, because at the end of the day, okay, so how much should I take and what should I experience from taking it?
Okay. True Niagen in the United States, has a recommended daily dose of 300 milligrams. And this is really not an extreme amount. As I said, there's a there's a history of people taking nicotinic acid up to 2 to 5 grams per day, which, based upon something called molecular weight of a compound, that'd be, even more NR. That'd be like 4 to 9 grams or something of NR. So we've tested NR up to 2 grams a day in people without seeing any serious adverse events. I know that there are certainly people out there that take more than 300 milligrams of True Niagen per day. Typically, what a person will do is take True Niagen in the morning, and as with their nutritional practice. So people that eat breakfast have it with breakfast. People that are not breakfast people don't have it with breakfast. It doesn't matter whether you take it with food or not in terms of absorption, as far as we know. People that take more than 300 milligrams typically split their dose into a morning and an evening, which means roughly 12 hours later. So if you're a 6 a.m. Person, you would take an evening dose around 12 hours later. The logic of that is that there's a circadian, there's actually a diurnal cycle of NAD, which means that there's a daytime peak and an evening peak in NAD. Metabolism is a 24-hour a day thing. You're burning calories, you're maintaining your body temperature, you're maintaining everything in your body 24 hours a day. And the morning dose of True Niagen would tend to boost your daytime NAD, whereas the evening one would tend to boost your evening NAD. You don't have to make yourself crazy with these things. I don't particularly advocate bizarro diets. I'm pretty omnivorous myself, and so I'm not, an advocate for, all meat diets, and I'm not an advocate for vegan diets. I respect people that have practices that work for them. But in general, I don't think that while monitoring your athletic performance and how you feel and journaling can be a very good thing, I think that there's potentially a tendency for people to overdo it in some of the monitoring things so that they don't even, enjoy life. But I think that what people will probably start observing over, 2-3 weeks is potentially an improvement in stamina, the ability to focus and work hard throughout the day. It's a common occurrence when, if you travel with with a work partner and you change a bunch of time zones, you may find that if you're taking True Niagen, that your ability to adjust to those time zones is better. Your ability to get through a winter or cold season may be enhanced. Your athletic performance and or recovery may be enhanced. You're very likely to notice more rapid fingernail growth, hair growth. There may be more in your razor if you, shave your head or beard or any part of your body. That's a anabolic component of NADP, NADPH, is that the NAD system is used to make stuff, and so you can actually see it, in a fully formed adult. What do we notice most in terms of growth? We're not getting, any taller, but we're growing, hair and nails continuously, and you will tend to notice faster hair and nail growth. There are not convincing data on human athletic performance because the teams that are using True Niagen don't particularly advertise it, and they, everybody is trying to maintain their edge and their internal, research on nutritional supplements and practices. But when you read about sports teams, I mean, I recently read that the Washington Nationals had a sleep consultant, and it's widely reported that teams like the Golden State Warriors and many other teams use very evidence-based practices to optimize athlete health. Some of us who consult for Chromadex and True Niagen have been photographed with various coaches and people in the sports world, and so it's widely understood that there's knowledge in high level college and pro athletics that True Niagen can be used sort of profitably by people to maintain their fitness and their resiliency, because it's used by athletes that take a beating on a Sunday and have to practice Tuesday through Saturday and suit up and do it again.
Gotcha. So it's being used by a lot of people who perform at a high level, but you can't necessarily mention them because of NDAs or whatnot to protect their. I get it. So this is
a little bit about clinical testing, right? Because we want to be evidence-based, and what all I've told you so far is that it does amazing things for mice and rats, right? So it allows, a rat to resist and, in some cases, reverse chemotherapeutic neuropathy, mice to, resist diabetic neuropathy and heart failure and central brain injury and lots of things like this. And then I told you in humans that it's safe and it doesn't cause flushing and that it raises human NAD. But what I haven't told you is a whole lot of efficacy stories in which there's 2 placebo-controlled clinical trials showing that NR did X, Y, or Z in a stressed human population. But let me tell you where the research is going in human beings. So in really one of the very first human trials, it was done in Colorado with older men and women. This was done in Boulder, Colorado. So the study participants were typical of, people in Boulder, meaning that they're active, they're physically fit. Their BMI was very much in the normal range, right around 24, right? So they were lean. But nearly half of them had moderately elevated blood pressure. Why? Because that's the case. Even if you look at fit, non-medicated, adults in Boulder, nearly half of them have a moderately elevated blood pressure. If they were medicated for their blood pressure, they would have been excluded from the study, right? Because the study was enrolling healthy people. Well, when, as Martens et al., Christopher Martens et al., carefully looked at the blood pressure data of people that had taken a gram of Niagen per day, they found that those people that had a moderately elevated blood pressure had their blood pressure normalized by
and that's with a gram a day, you said?
That's at a gram a day, yes.
Okay.
That's at a gram a day. Had their blood pressure normalized. But the people that had normal blood pressure did not have their blood pressure depressed. So it actually moved people. So it was really, really nice. It moved people into this very nice normal range. So now what we have to do, and I'm not doing that study, but now what the scientific community has to do is enroll people with moderately elevated blood pressure and specifically design a study that will, randomize people for that parameter and look for, normalizing blood pressure as the primary outcome of the study. Similarly, there was a study that was done in Denmark where it was a short-term study. It was 12 weeks, and these folks took Niagen at 2 grams a day, and they were all overweight and they were becoming insulin insensitive, and they were in their 60s. They were all men, by the way. And the study I think it was overly wishful in looking for weight loss and insulin sensitizing effect of NR in 12 weeks without any lifestyle coaching or exercise. Well, Ted, you're a trainer and coach, and you know very well that if you don't change people's diet or exercise, there's no magic pill that in 12 weeks that is going to allow them to lose weight, right? Unless the pill is some kind of, serious thing that gives them bowel movements as soon as they eat, right? Some kind of malabsorptive, pill.
Or something that makes them feel so good they start doing the things they need to be doing, yes.
Happy pills or... So the people didn't lose weight. They didn't become insulin, more insulin sensitive. But again, if you looked carefully at the data, it turned out that quite a few people had a fatty liver. Well, so that's not surprising if they were overweight and becoming insulin, and they were insulin insensitive. But it turns out that the higher the fatty liver that they started out with, the more benefit that they got. And if you looked at the result of the study, the people that were on the high dose Niagen lost 2% of their fatty liver, meaning going from like 11% fatty liver to 9-ish% of their liver was fat in the 12 weeks. And there was like 0.2% change in the placebo. So there's literally 10 times as much movement in fatty liver. But it was a small study, and it wasn't randomized to detect the change in fatty liver. So we published it as P equals 0.13, which means you can't say with statistical certainty that Niagen was improving their fatty liver, but you tell me some other thing that would drop you don't drop fatty liver by 2% by chance. So we think that NR, right? We think that NR was moving the needle on fatty liver in these overweight men, and that we need to have a study specifically to detect a change in fatty liver. Similarly, there's studies with mild cognitive impairment. There's one or two studies that have enrolled on, protection against heart failure. And there's close to 40 studies, I think, that have been registered globally to look at NR in disease and conditions of metabolic stress. So we think that it's, early days for NR. I mean, 2004, I had the first paper on NR, being discovered in the yeast system, and then the description of the human NR kinase genes. And, about less than 10 years later, we were already with Chromadex had the ability to manufacture this compound and had a clean crystal form with FDA, observation. We're able to make it available to humans. So the people that are taking it now are the early adopters, and they're telling their own stories about whether they find value in improving their health and resiliency. And we hope that in the fullness of time, we'll be able to make structure function claims that are evidence-based that show in what ways NR improves aspect of human performance and human health and wellness.
Well, Charles, that's all great, man. I appreciate the thoroughness. Let me ask you this. Is there someone who should not, are there any contraindications for any type of medical issue? Like, is there anybody who shouldn't try this supplement?
Not to our knowledge. In the studies that have enrolled that are placebo-controlled, we've not seen any events, that are, Niagen attributable, which means, if you observe, 140 people for, 8 weeks, as we recently did, there are some people that have a bellyache, right, on a particular day. But if you look at the 35 people that took placebo versus the 35 people that took 100, 300, or 1,000 milligrams of Niagen per day, you don't see any increases or dose-dependent increases in any report with Niagen versus the people that were on placebo. Now, that doesn't mean that we've tested every possible human genotype or, every medication a person that might be on. So we always say, ask your doctor if you have a condition. There are certainly people that have had chemotherapy in the past that, have read about what we've done with rats and the fact that there's a phase 2 clinical trial at the University of Iowa looking at the ability of Niagen to protect women who are getting, chemotherapy from the neuropathy that comes from chemo. So there are people that are asking their doctor, if they can try it, and so that's essentially where we come down. Is that I don't make personal nutritional recommendations from people. I'm not your doctor. I'm a PhD. But it's available as an over-the-counter supplement, and if we certainly want docs to learn more about it. In fact, I think that there's a website called practitioner.trueniagen.com where docs can learn more and they can actually even buy it and make it available for their patients.
Okay, and I'll have all those links in the show notes for the episode. I've got a good follow-up question. One of your followers on Twitter asked, is consuming additional nutrients such as Resveratrol with NAD beneficial, and at what dosage?
I don't really know why it would be. So resveratrol is a phytochemical. It's a polyphenolic compound that is in grapes. And I think veggies are great. I think that fruits and vegetables are wonderful. They contain thousands, tens of thousands of valuable compounds. Resveratrol was touted as a SIRT1 activator. Years ago, we know that it is not a SIRT1 activator. Resveratrol does remarkable things for mice when it's given to mice at high doses. It has very poor human bioavailability, and compounds like pterostilbene that are related to resveratrol that have better human bioavailability don't do the things that you really want them to do. So pterostilbene raises LDL cholesterol, bad cholesterol in human beings. That's been shown in 2 different studies now. And so I'm not an advocate for resveratrol. I'm an advocate for eating fruits and vegetables, but I'm not an advocate for resveratrol.
You feel like the evidence just, or based on your review of the evidence is what I should say, it's just not strong enough, especially when there's something like nicotinamide riboside available with much more evidence. So if you're going to spend your money on something, if you're going to be popping a pill, which you should be doing all the other stuff too, but place your bets on NR instead.
I truly would say that resveratrol is not an evidence-based supplement for human beings.
Okay, cool. I got another great question, and this actually comes from Facebook, and the question is, and this is a little bit left field, but I asked about if someone had a question specifically for you based on what we were going to discuss today, and this was the question. So, should non-diabetics be taking metformin like David Sinclair does? Something you want to dive into?
Not really. Metformin is a diabetes drug, and it inhibits mitochondrial function. It has a very complex mechanism of action, and there's some evidence that it impairs athletic performance. Right. It's certainly not something that I would want to take.
Yeah, you made a great point there. Kevin Bass on Twitter shared that study, and I think it's something that people keep on running into. Like, oh, should we restrict protein because the methionine, sorry, it's a little bit late over here, so I'm mispronouncing my amino acids, but, protein restriction, should we do protein restriction and like long fasts and these types of things to live longer? And I've had so many people come on who actually do research in this area and say, if you're going to hedge your bets, go for, first of all, heart disease is the number one killer, right? So doing things that are going to help you out with that, specifically staying more active, is going to be a greater benefit than, perhaps even the whatever restricting protein may or may not do, which I guess the thinking there is, perhaps preventing cancer. So, all right.
Ted, I know I could tell you people that go on, Twitter that are self-proclaimed experts that will simultaneously advocate rapamycin, which inhibits the TOR pathway, and branch chain amino acids, which activate the TOR pathway. Right. And it's nuts. Okay, so eat food, varied food, exercise, like we said earlier, take mom's advice and be physically and mentally active, get your, macronutrients from food rather than jars of whey or branched chain amino acids. Not to say that performance athletes may have found particular combinations of things that they can use to supplement their food, but I don't really want to advocate for people going on essentially synthetic diets with ridiculous amounts of supplements that are not evidence-based.
Gotcha. And I think there are a couple other questions, but I think the thing that I'd like to maybe finish off on is what we're talking about. Actually, one of the things when I asked you, hey, what would you like to talk about? You talked about, what it means to be evidence-based, what it means to be using information that, well, like you said, there's people, I'll put it in your words, it is critically important to figure out who is evidence-based and who is telling people what they want to hear. Just because something makes a good soundbite doesn't mean it's true. And we are living in the time where sound bites are the things that sell. Like you said about that person on Twitter who recommends like doing something to inhibit the mTOR pathway, and then recommends, taking branched chain amino acids, which activates the mTOR pathway. It's like, well, what are you talking about here? You're saying that you're just saying things, and you sound like you're scientific. In fact, some of the people that I know are just completely full of crap. I've seen people who follow them say, "Oh, listen to this guy. He's, really based in the science." And I'm like, whoa, wow. There's just this huge lack of scientific literacy is what I would call it. Any advice for people out there struggling to determine who to listen to and who they should steer clear of?
That's a really hard one, Ted, because as you said, innovators might have discovered something important, and like in my case, we discovered our discoveries with NR allowed for kind of an NR industry and NR supplements. But I'll also tell you about a mouse study in which nicotinamide had activity, in glaucoma. So I think the key is to not be promotional and not listen to people that are promotional, and try to follow people that test hypotheses, and rather than asserting that something is true and changing the explanation and changing the mechanism as different. So what you have to be really cautious about is when people have a non-falsifiable hypothesis. So if they say, resveratrol binds and activates SIRT1, and then you do experiments and show, well, no, it doesn't actually do that because it has the same effects on cells that don't have SIRT1 as it has on cells that do have SIRT1. And then they come up with another mechanism by which resveratrol works, that actually the whole premise of their research has been fully undermined, and they're just trying to come up with another way of selling something. So you have to evaluate people, and people have to be able to say, look, we're going to do an experiment. We're going to figure out what the value of something is. So we're doing experiments in our laboratory now that are totally blinded, that are supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that are going to look at to what degree nicotinamide riboside is special in a particular assay. So we have something we're interested in maternal and neonatal health. And so we're doing an experiment with rats where we're actually comparing NR with nicotinamide, with nicotinic acid and tryptophan and NMN and different doses. And our laboratory is blinded to which rats are on which supplement, if you will. And we've committed to publish the results of the experiment in order to test whether there's added value in NR and, whether, the availability issues that have been discussed by me and other people are substantive. And so I think it's just important that people are honest and evidence-based. And, even if they've discovered important things, that they put those things up to falsifiable tests, and that they're engaged in the scientific process. And we don't really do science on Twitter. We try to explain things to the public on Twitter, but we actually do the science in the laboratory and in the clinic. And, you have to be patient for things to come out. And ultimately, science is self-correcting, but people do like to follow a good story, and there are some stories out there that are not evidence-based.
Yeah, I think what you said is really important. And if I had to kind of summarize it, it's look for people who promote things but are willing to put them to the test, who are willing to be wrong if it doesn't come out, if a test or a study in a lab doesn't turn out the way that we might think or had hoped would turn out. Look for those people who are willing to be wrong and to think critically, and because they're doing it for the greater good, and also to give people like you listening right now the best practices, strategies, tactics, tips, whatever you want to call them, that you can actually use. And so many people, Charles, fall prey to so many myths, especially with fat loss, about the slow metabolism, the starvation mode, I'm only eating 1,000 calories and my body's in starvation mode, and that's why I can't lose weight, or that carbs make you fat, no matter if you're in a calorie deficit or if you're, it's all these things, and people are so confused, so don't know what to believe or who to believe. And by the way, I just want to point this out too. I like the way things are now. I think it's a mess, but I do think that there is a movement. I don't know what you think. I'm curious about your opinion, but I see a movement towards being more evidence-based. There's always going to be the flat earthers and the people who think we never made it to the moon, or whatever other conspiracy or belief in something without much evidence because they want to feel special or belong to a special group of people. But in general, I think the majority of people, it's like, man, just tell me what works, just give me the thing that works, explain it to me, and when it doesn't work, tell me why it doesn't work. I saw the other day a person who was saying, well, I lost 40 pounds on keto because that was a hot thing to do. That's me adding that in there, not them. But then they switched to carnivores, and then they gained 20 pounds back, and they were dumbfounded as to why that happened, because if keto is so great, then carnivore, it's even more extreme in the next level. You can't even eat anything except meat. And they were dumbfounded as to why that happened, when you and I know exactly why, right? What do you think? Do you think things are getting a bit better? That there's some movement towards like, okay, let's look at what's really happening here and be more science-based, evidence-based?
Well, I hope so, Ted. But there's a lot of people out there that want to sell something, or that have a little consulting business and an interest in a particular outcome. But we need more communication, and we need more unbiased experiments. And I think it's great. I'm really happy to be working with the Gates Foundation now, where we have the expertise to do an experiment, and we figured out a way to do an experiment so that my staff don't know which supplement the rats are on, and then the Gates Foundation staff are going to unblind, the code when we have all of the results done. And I think that this is the way, science should be done, with a commitment to publish the results as they fall out, and that people need to know that not all opinions are equally valid when it comes to science, right? Everyone has, there's a particular anatomical feature that everyone has, but that doesn't mean that everyone has the same level of expertise. And time will tell, but we're very optimistic, in the NR world, because the failing heart induces the NR kinase pathway, and when you blast a sound, underwater, and you look at what happens with the genes that are expressed in the hearing system of the fish, the nicotinamide riboside kinase gene comes up. So under all these conditions of metabolic stress, the NR pathway is getting induced, and we think that is telling us that animal bodies and humans are animals are inducing the NR pathway in order to restore their NAD in these conditions of metabolic stress, and that by delivering NR orally, that people will benefit from this technology. But over time, we'll have a lot more evidence than we have today. But it's been a pleasure to speak with you, and I hope that we've helped people interpret the science, and that they can follow me on Twitter with additional questions, and I'm sure they'll be seeing that our lab will be posting more exciting papers in the future.
Excellent. Yep. Charles, it's been a pleasure. If you'd like to follow Charles, go to twitter.com/Charles M. Brenner. That's CharlesMBrenner. I'll have that link in the show notes. TrueNiagen.com. That's TrueNiagen.com. And if you want to learn more about NAD, go to aboutnad.com. And again, the links will be on the show notes for this episode. Dr. Charles Brenner, thanks again. This was a great first one to provide some foundational context. Let's do it again soon. And thank you for what you're doing out there, promoting evidence-based supplementation and anti-aging practices, longevity practices. Thanks so much for what you do. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. I know that was a long one and it got pretty interesting there a few times. I hope you stayed with it. I hope you're listening all the way to the end, even if it took you 2 times to get through it. I know Charles brought up a lot of complicated physiology that you may not have heard of, or maybe you're right on target with it and you've been following his work and NAD for a long time. Either way, again, if you appreciate what I did and what I do, getting people like Charles on the show, please share this on social media and give me a mention. Tag me when you share it so I know that you're sharing it. Okay, it's the highest compliment you can pay for me and what I do with Legendary Life. And I want to say this before I wrap up here. The holidays are just around the corner. And if you're thinking about getting back on track at the beginning of the year, I've got a cool invitation for you. I've talked about my coaching program a lot. I've got 5 spots left for the end of the year. So if you're a person who wants to get started right away so that you can make all your friends jealous at the holiday parties while you're eating the same things that they're eating and losing body fat, and they're all looking at you like you're doing something magical and feeling quite jealous as their waistlines expand, and you want to be down 5 pounds, 10 pounds by Christmas and feeling great before the year starts, I want you to go to Legendary. Let's try that again. LegendaryLifeProgram.com/apply and schedule your free breakthrough call with me. And in case you want to wait for the beginning of the year, I'm opening 15 spots at the beginning of the year and 5 spots for my private coaching at the beginning of the year. So this starts the first week of January. And again, if you're not familiar, it's a 12-week program that's designed to completely transform your body, upgrade your health, to make you feel 10 years younger, to get you to step up and have that experience of life that comes from not just working out more or losing weight, but really dialing in a program that will take you to the next level, that encompasses all the important aspects of what goes into not just health in your body, but psychological health, social health, stepping up, enjoying life. But there's a catch. The spots are limited. They're not going to last. We're doing Facebook ads. I'm being interviewed on other shows. So if you are interested in finally making a resolution for the new year and following through with it and putting your money where your mouth is, really, go to legendarylifeprogram.com and schedule your free breakthrough call with me. And if you're a good fit, I'll invite you into the program and I will be able to guarantee your spot for January. Again, that's legendarylifeprogram.com/apply. That's it. Hope you enjoyed this. Have an amazing week. Love you and talk to you soon.